"You didn't lose your empire, Mr. Hahn. You built a machine that stopped seeing people," said Isaiah Reed, the night sweeper who once ran Henbridge's forgotten review office. Hours after his company collapsed, disgraced chairman Daniel Hahn found a rain-soaked grey folder pulled from the trash. Inside were buried complaints, forged approvals, and letters from workers his empire had erased. The evidence could clear his name, but only if he ignored the damage he had helped create. Soon, that folder would lie open before an entire hearing room, tied with one faded red cord. Would Daniel use it to reclaim his throne, or destroy the kind of empire he once ruled? The first sign that Henbridge was dying was not the alarm on Daniel Hahn's phone. It was the silence outside the boardroom. For 20 years, people had hurried when he entered a hallway. Assistants moved faster, directors sat straighter. That morning, no one moved at all. Daniel stepped out of the elevator and found 6 security officers waiting beside the glass doors. Behind them, the company logo still shone across the white marble wall. Henbridge Urban Logistics. The name had once appeared on trucks and warehouses across 6 cities. Now the letters looked borrowed. A young guard held out one hand. "Your access has been suspended, Mr. Hahn." Daniel looked at the man's badge before he looked at his face. Eric Lawson, Night Division. By whose authority? The guard glanced toward the boardroom. That was answer enough. Daniel placed his identification card against the reader anyway. The light flashed red. He tried once more, slower this time, as if the machine might recognize the weight of his name. It flashed red again. Through the glass, members of the board sat around the long black table. Some watched him. Others studied papers that had not interested them the day before. Julian Cross stood near the far window, with one hand resting on the back of Daniel's chair. Not beside it, on it. Daniel felt the difference. The doors opened from inside. Naomi Park, the former compliance director, stepped into the hallway, carrying a thin folder. She had resigned 6 months earlier. Her face was calm, but her fingers pressed too tightly against the folder's edge. "You need legal counsel," she said. "I have legal counsel, not the counsel the company pays." Before Daniel could answer, every phone in the corridor began to vibrate. The news alert appeared at the same time. Henbridge credit lines frozen amid allegations of fraudulent transfers. A second alert followed. Federal investigators reviewing executive approvals linked to shell vendors. Then a third. Employees may not receive scheduled payroll. The words did not feel real until someone behind the reception desk began to cry. It was not loud. That made it worse. Daniel turned toward the sound. A payroll coordinator named Melissa stood with both hands over her mouth. She had worked at Henbridge for 11 years. Her husband drove one of the company's regional routes. He had not remembered her name until that moment. Around the lobby, employees began refreshing their banking applications. A dispatcher called his wife. 2 young analysts whispered about rent. No one asked what would happen to Daniel. A woman near the elevators lowered her coffee and watched him as though witnessing a building collapse. Julian came through the glass doors wearing a charcoal suit and the expression of a man arriving at a funeral he had already prepared. "The board has appointed me interim chief executive," he said. Daniel looked past him at the chair by the window. For how long? Until stability is restored. Stability for whom? Julian's mouth tightened, but only for a second. This is not the place. The lobby had already decided otherwise. Employees had stopped pretending not to listen. A camera crew waited beyond the revolving doors. Someone outside held a sign with Daniel's face printed above the word thief. Daniel lowered his voice. "Did you authorize the transfer freeze?" Julian did not answer. Instead, he handed Daniel a document removing him from operational authority. The signature page carried the names of people who had toasted him at the company anniversary less than a week earlier. Daniel read every line. He did not tear it. He did not raise his voice. He signed the acknowledgement and returned the pen. That frightened Julian more than anger would have. Security escorted Daniel across the lobby. The marble floor reflected the cameras outside. Employees moved around him in uncertain currents, carrying boxes and coats. Near the service corridor, a maintenance worker pushed a cart stacked with grey archive bins. One bin had split along the side. Papers pressed through the crack, held in place by a strip of red cord. Daniel slowed. The maintenance worker looked away quietly. A second man in a disposal uniform pulled the cart toward the freight elevator. The label on the top bin had been torn off, but a few handwritten words remained. Second review. Do not discard. Daniel took one step toward it. A security officer touched his arm. This way, sir. The freight elevator doors closed before Daniel could see the rest. Outside, rain struck the steps in hard silver lines. Reporters called his name. Questions collided around him. Had he stolen employee pension funds? Had he approved the shell companies? Was he preparing to leave the country? Daniel stood beneath the company entrance while the Handbridge logo glowed above his head. 24 hours earlier, more than 2,000 people had answered to him. Now his phone displayed a final message from the bank. All personal accounts linked to the investigation had been restricted. Across the street, another alert appeared on the public screen. Julian Cross promised full cooperation and a new era of transparency. Daniel looked back through the glass. Far below the lobby, hidden beyond the service corridor, the freight elevator was carrying the grey archive bins toward the loading dock. Someone had already ordered the past destroyed, and someone had done it before Daniel knew there was a war. The rain followed Daniel down the steps as if it had been waiting for him. At the curb, the company car was gone. For 12 years, a black sedan had appeared before he reached the street. That night, there were only wet taxis and a delivery cyclist beneath an awning. Daniel opened the transportation app on his phone. Payment declined. He tried another card. Restricted account. The screen reflected his face back at him. Water ran from his hair to the collar of his coat. Behind him, reporters continued calling his name, but their voices were already turning toward Julian. Daniel crossed the street without answering. He called his attorney first. Voicemail. He called the chairman of the board. No answer. He called a man who had once told him that Handbridge was more family than company. The line rang twice before ending. Daniel stood beneath the shelter of a closed pharmacy and looked through his contacts. Hundreds of names filled the screen. Bankers, investors, city officials, people who sent wine to his apartment and cards on his birthday. He called 7 of them. No one answered. The 8th call connected. Daniel. It was Michael Trent, his personal attorney. I need access to the apartment, Daniel said. My key has been deactivated. You cannot go there tonight. It is my home. The property is held through a company named in the investigation. My clothes are there. I know. My passport. Do not touch your passport. Daniel watched a bus pass through. Did you know this was coming? Silence settled between them. Not long, long enough. Get independent counsel, Michael said. Do not call anyone from Handbridge. Do not send messages. Do not delete anything. The line went dead. Across the avenue, the windows of Handbridge Tower still burned with light. For years, Daniel had believed the building looked strongest at night. Now every bright floor seemed occupied by people deciding how much of him could be cut away. He walked toward the hotel, where visiting partners usually stayed. The doorman recognized him immediately. His expression changed before Daniel reached the entrance. Mr. Hahn, I need a room. The man looked past him, searching for the car that was not there. I will speak with the desk. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished wood and expensive flowers. That evening, the receptionist typed his name into the system and stopped. I am sorry, sir. Use a different card. We cannot accept a reservation connected to an account under restriction. I can pay tomorrow. The receptionist glanced toward her supervisor. The supervisor did not approach. Daniel noticed a couple near the fireplace watching him. The man lifted his phone, pretending to read. The camera faced Daniel. "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked. The receptionist lowered her voice. "I have been instructed not to complete the booking." Daniel left before she could apologize again. He had built a life in which every locked door opened before he touched it. That life had ended. His shoes had begun to fill with water. The leather darkened around the edges. A suit that had cost more than some employees earned in a month now clung to him like wet paper. At the next corner, a young man stared at him beneath a transparent umbrella. "You are Daniel Han." Daniel kept walking. The young man followed. "My mother works in payroll. She says they may not get paid. I am trying to understand what happened. You ran the company." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. The young man raised his phone. A red light showed that he was recording. "Tell her I am sorry," Daniel said. "Sorry does not pay rent." Daniel had no answer. By the time he reached the river district, the video was online. His apology played silently across a screen in an electronics store window. Beneath it, comments moved too quickly to read. Thief, coward, fraud. One message remained visible longer. He does not even look sorry. Daniel studied the man on the screen. Wet hair, empty hands, a face trained not to reveal weakness. For the first time, he understood how cold that face could look. He walked until the office towers gave way to warehouses and shuttered restaurants. His phone battery reached its final warning. He entered a convenience store and placed a bottle of water on the counter. The card failed again. The cashier recognized him only after the machine rejected the payment. "You have cash?" Daniel searched his pockets. A receipt. A metal key that opened nothing. One folded business card. 3 coins. Not enough. He returned the bottle to the refrigerator. Near midnight, Daniel sat alone beneath the roof of a bus stop. A cleaner pushed a mop across the lobby behind him. A driver slept with his head against a steering wheel. 2 kitchen workers shared food from a paper container before another shift. Daniel watched them without being seen. A memory came without warning. His father stood outside a factory gate, holding a lunch tin after being told his job no longer existed. Daniel had been 13. He remembered feeling ashamed of the way his father waited for someone to call him back. No one had. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, his phone was dead. There were no calls left to make. He rose and continued toward the dark edge of the financial district, where the river moved beneath the bridges and the streets emptied after midnight. Behind him, someone lifted a broom and began sweeping rainwater, leaves, and torn paper from the pavement. The sound followed him into the dark. The financial district changed after midnight. During the day, its towers seemed to belong to executives and lawyers. At night, the glass reflected empty streets and the workers who kept those streets alive. Daniel walked without direction. The river remained somewhere ahead of him, dark beyond the warehouses, but he no longer knew whether he was moving toward it or simply away from everything else. A woman in a blue uniform unlocked the side entrance of a bank and carried cleaning supplies inside. 2 men unloaded vegetables behind a restaurant. A security guard sat behind a desk eating rice from a plastic container while watching 6 monitors. None of them looked at Daniel for more than a moment. That should have felt like mercy. Instead, it felt like disappearance. All evening, strangers had recognized his face. They had filmed him, accused him, or moved away. Here, among people working before dawn, he was only another man walking too slowly. Daniel stopped beneath a bridge, where the traffic overhead made the concrete tremble. Rainwater fell through a crack in a steady rhythm. Across the road, A maintenance worker swept broken glass into a metal pan. Daniel watched the broom move, back and forth. The sound was small, but it held the street together. He thought of the boardroom, the polished table, Julian's hand on his chair, the signatures beneath the document that had removed him. He tried to feel anger, but anger required a belief that something still belonged to him. Nothing did. The company was gone. His accounts were frozen. His home was sealed behind a legal notice. Even his name had become public property, repeated by people who had never met him. He reached into his coat and found the metal key from his apartment. It was heavy, silver, and useless. For years, Daniel had kept keys to offices, vehicles, storage rooms, and homes in different cities. Assistants labeled them. Drivers carried copies. Security teams changed locks when necessary. This key opened nothing now. He closed his hand around it until the ridged edge pressed into his skin. At the far end of the bridge, a man pushed a cart loaded with cardboard and trash bags. A reflective stripe crossed the back of his jacket. He moved slowly, pausing whenever the wheels caught in the cracks. Daniel stepped aside. The man did not thank him. He did not recognize him. He adjusted the cart and continued. Daniel stared after him. A question formed before he could stop it. What remained of a person when no one needed his name? He had spent his life believing value could be measured. Revenue, growth, market share, salaries, buildings, vehicles, the number of people who waited when he entered a room. Now the numbers had vanished, and he could not find the part of himself that had existed before them. A truck passed through a puddle and threw cold water across his trousers. Daniel barely moved. Near the river entrance, a chain fence separated the street from the lower walkway. Beyond it, black water moved beneath the city lights. A warning sign hung beside the gate, but one corner had come loose and struck the pole whenever the wind changed. Daniel stood there for a long time. He imagined the silence beneath the water. No cameras, no questions, no more statements written by lawyers, no more employees checking accounts that would remain empty because he had failed to see what was happening inside his own company. His hand tightened around the useless key. Then something white slid across the pavement and caught against his shoe. It was a page from a handbridge form. The company logo had blurred in the rain, but Daniel recognized the layout. Vendor review, payment authorization. A section near the bottom had been torn away. He bent and picked it up. Another page followed, then another. They came down the street in irregular bursts, pushed by the wind. Some were blank on one side. Others carried dates, initials, and handwritten notes. One page had a brown water stain, shaped like a hand. Daniel looked toward the corner. A sanitation cart had overturned beside the service lane. Grey archive bins lay on their sides. Papers had spilled across the pavement and into the gutter, the same bins he had seen near the freight elevator. A man in a dark work jacket was trying to pull them away from the rain. He was older, with silver hair beneath a knit cap and a narrow face marked by years of night air. A broom leaned against the cart. He moved with care, lifting each page as if it mattered. Daniel crossed the street before deciding to. He picked up a second form, then a third. The older man glanced at him but said nothing. Together, they gathered papers beneath the weak light of a closed loading dock. Daniel recognized department codes, vendor numbers, and approval stamps. Some records were more than a decade old. Others had been printed that week. One sheet carried Julian Cross's initials beside a payment Daniel had never seen. Daniel looked up. The older man had stopped moving. His eyes were fixed on Daniel's face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then a city bus passed between them and the towers, filling the street with light before leaving it dark again. The older man reached for the page in Daniel's hand. Daniel did not release it. "Where did you get these?" The man looked toward the scattered bins. from people who thought no one would look twice. A gust of wind lifted another stack. Daniel turned and caught it against his chest. The pages smelled of rain, dust, and old paper. At the bottom of the pile was a grey folder, tied with faded red cord. 3 handwritten words remained visible beneath the water. Second look required. The older man reached for his broom. "If you are going to stand there," he said, "you can help me save the rest." Daniel bent to gather the nearest pages, before the rain could carry them into the gutter. The older man did not thank him. He worked with the economy of someone who had spent years doing things without expecting anyone to notice. He lifted each sheet by its dry edge, tapped the corners against his palm, and placed it beneath the lid of a grey bin. Daniel followed his rhythm. For several minutes, they spoke only through movement. Paper scraped against wet pavement. The broom handle knocked against the cart. Water ran along the curb and pulled ink into pale blue threads. The city clock above the transit station showed 3 in the morning. Daniel found a stack of vendor complaints beneath the wheel of the cart. The top page carried the Handbridge logo, a date from 9 years earlier, and a handwritten note in the margin. Reviewed by operations. No further action. He knew the phrase. It had appeared in thousands of internal reports. It meant the matter had been reduced, routed, and buried. He placed the stack inside the bin. The older man watched him do it. "You read fast," he said. "I know the format. I know." Daniel looked at him. The man had already turned away. They moved toward the loading dock, where the wind was weaker. A yellow lamp above the door flickered periodically. Beneath it, the grey folder tied with red cord lay across the seat of the cart. Daniel kept noticing it. The cord had darkened with rain. One corner of the cover had softened and begun to curl. The handwriting across the front was uneven, but deliberate. Second look. Do not discard. Daniel reached for it. The older man placed one hand over the folder. Not yet. Daniel withdrew his hand. "You know who I am." The man adjusted the lid of the nearest bin. "I know your name." "That is not what I asked." "No, it is not." Daniel studied him. The reflective strip on his jacket had cracked with age. His gloves were repaired at the fingers with black tape. A city sanitation badge hung from his chest, turned inward. Isaiah Reed. The name struck something faint in Daniel's memory, but the memory would not open. "Have we met?" Isaiah lifted another page from beneath the cart. "You have stood in rooms where I was present." "That is not the same thing." "No," Isaiah said. "It usually is not." The answer landed harder than accusation. Daniel looked toward the street. No reporters had followed him this far. No cameras waited beneath the loading dock. He could leave, and no one would see him do it. Isaiah seemed to understand that. He pointed to the remaining papers caught beneath a parked delivery truck. Daniel walked into the rain and collected them. One page had been folded into quarters, another carried a coffee ring, a third had a photograph clipped to it. The photograph showed a warehouse crew standing beside a loading bay. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. One man held a child on his shoulders. Daniel turned the photograph over. "Thank you for keeping the night shift open." There was no signature. He brought it back to the cart. Isaiah took the photograph more carefully than the financial documents. "What is all this?" Daniel asked. Things people decided were no longer useful. "These are company records." They were. Some of them may be evidence. They always were. Daniel looked at the grey bins. The papers no longer seemed random. They had been sorted by year and department. Coloured tabs still marked certain groups. Someone had preserved the order, even after the files were sent for disposal. "Who gave these to you?" Isaiah picked up the broom. A man at the loading dock left the gate open. Why? Maybe he made a mistake. Isaiah swept water away from the bottom of the cart. Or maybe he was tired of making the same mistake every day. Daniel heard the caution beneath the words. Was it someone from Hanbridge? Isaiah looked at him without distance. "You still think the company is the building?" Daniel said nothing. Isaiah leaned the broom against the wall. He removed one glove and opened the grey folder, just enough to check the first page. Daniel saw typed lines, handwritten initials, and the edge of an old envelope. Then Isaiah closed it again. What is inside? A second version. Of what? Of your company. Daniel's jaw tightened. I built Handbridge. You built the part that fit inside reports. The yellow lamp flickered. Somewhere beyond the loading dock, a truck reversed with a slow mechanical warning. Daniel stepped closer. If those documents show fraud, they have to go to investigators. Some will. Then give them to me. Isaiah's face did not change. Why? Because my name is on the company. That is the first problem. Daniel felt anger rise, clean and familiar. For a moment, it almost restored him. You think I stole from those people. I think you stopped looking at them. I employed more than 2,000 workers. Isaiah held his gaze. You counted more than 2,000 workers. The difference settled between them. Daniel looked down at the photograph again. The child on the man's shoulders had one hand raised toward the camera. The gesture was small and careless. It had survived 9 years, a disposal order, and the rain. What do you want from me? Daniel asked. Isaiah pulled his glove back on. Right now? He pointed toward the gutter. A final sheet of paper had caught against the storm drain. Water pressed it flat against the metal grate. I want you to pick that up before it disappears. Daniel walked to the curb and knelt. The water was cold around his fingers. The page resisted when he pulled it free. It was a termination appeal from a warehouse mechanic named Samuel Ortiz. At the bottom, beneath the appeal, was an executive authorization. Daniel recognized the digital signature before he read the name. His own. He remained kneeling in the rain. Behind him, Isaiah lifted the grey folder from the cart. You asked if I knew who you were, he said. Daniel turned. Isaiah tied the red cord once more. I know who signed the first order. Daniel stayed on one knee until the cold reached through his trousers. The termination appeal trembled in his hand. Samuel Ortiz, warehouse mechanic, 12 years of service. Injury reported after a hydraulic lift failed during a night shift. Medical coverage denied. Employment terminated for repeated absence. At the bottom sat Daniel's digital authorization. Approved. No further review. He knew the signature system. Senior executives did not sign every document by hand. Their approvals were attached through delegated workflows, routed through legal, finance, and operations. Daniel had defended that system because it kept decisions moving. Now the signature looked personal. Isaiah waited beside the cart. You remember him? He asked. Daniel read the name again. No, that is honest. It does not make it better. No. Isaiah took the page and slid it into the grey folder. Then he pushed the cart beneath the loading dock, away from the rain. A maintenance room stood behind the metal door. Inside were shelves of cleaning supplies, a utility sink, and a scarred wooden table beneath a fluorescent light. Isaiah unlocked it with a small brass key. Daniel followed him in. The room smelled of soap, wet paper, and old coffee. A portable heater clicked near the wall, but gave little warmth. Isaiah removed his gloves, set the grey folder on the table, and untied the red cord. He did not open it immediately. You think this can save you, he said. If it proves those transfers were hidden from me, it may. Isaiah looked at him. That was not what I said. Daniel held his gaze. Isaiah opened the cover. The first section contained letters written on lined paper, company stationery, greeting cards, and pages torn from notebooks. He placed the first one in front of Daniel. Dear Handbridge Management, thank you for keeping my husband on the morning route while I was receiving treatment. It meant he could take me to the hospital and still keep our insurance. Daniel read it twice. There was no executive name at the bottom, only a signature from a woman named Teresa Bell. The next letter thanked a warehouse supervisor for allowing an employee to bring his son to work after a childcare emergency. Another came from the family of a driver who had died during a snowstorm. The company had paid for the funeral. Daniel remembered approving an emergency fund. He did not remember the people. "Why keep these?" he asked. "Because the company did not. They were archived. They were scheduled for disposal." Isaiah placed another page before him. This one was a complaint. A woman named Lena Brooks had reported that a regional manager changed delivery records to avoid overtime payments. Her complaint had been marked resolved, though no interview had taken place. The next complaint described damaged brakes on 3 trucks. Another reported that temporary workers were lifting freight without safety training. Each file ended with the same phrase, "No further action." Daniel read faster. The pages formed a pattern he had never seen in board reports. Gratitude and injury. Loyalty and silence. Small acts of kindness preserved beside decisions that had harmed the same people. What department kept these? Employee review and community records. I do not remember that name. You changed it twice before you closed it. Daniel looked up. Isaiah sat across from him. We collected complaints that did not fit clean categories. Payroll disputes, safety concerns, family emergencies, vendor pressure, things legal called informal, and finance called unverified. Who authorized the closure? Isaiah turned the Samuel Ortiz appeal toward him. Daniel looked at his own name again. This was delegated. That is what men at the top call a decision when it reaches the bottom. Daniel pushed the page away. If you have evidence of fraud, give it to investigators. Keeping it here puts you at risk. I have lived with risk longer than you have lived with consequences. I can protect you. With what? Daniel opened his mouth. Money came first, then lawyers, then influence. None belonged to him anymore. Isaiah turned to another section. These pages carried vendor codes, payment dates, and handwritten initials. Several names matched companies mentioned in the news alerts. Daniel leaned closer. This one was created 3 years ago. Yes. It never completed a delivery. No. Yet it was paid every month. Yes. Daniel followed the approval chain with his finger. The final authorization bore Julian Cross's initials. Beneath them sat Daniel's executive seal. This is impossible. Why? I was in Seoul on that date. Isaiah placed a second record beside it. The same seal appeared on another payment approved in Chicago that afternoon. Daniel stared at both pages. For the first time since leaving the tower, his mind moved with its old precision. Dates, locations, authorization paths, delegated access. Someone had used his identity inside the system. He reached for the folder. Isaiah closed it. I need those pages. You need to understand them. I understand enough. No, you understand what they can do for you. Daniel stood. They may prove I did not approve the transfers. They may. Then why are you withholding them? Isaiah retied the red cord. Because this folder is not a ladder back to your office. Daniel placed both hands on the table. 2,000 people may lose their jobs. They were losing pieces of their lives long before last night. I did not know. Isaiah looked at him. That sentence is not as clean as you think. The heater clicked off. Daniel lowered himself into the chair. What do you want me to do? First, stop calling what happened to you your identity. Daniel said nothing. You lost a company. You did not become the loss. Isaiah pushed a blank sheet across the table. Write what happened. Daniel picked up a pen. My company collapsed. My accounts were frozen. My board removed me. My employees may not be paid. He stopped. Now write what you still have. Daniel stared at the empty space. Then he wrote slowly. I know how the company moved. I know the people who built its roots. I know where the reports should have gone. I can still read the system. Isaiah read the lines without comment. Then he opened the folder and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. Daniel's name was written across the front in blue ink. The date was 12 years old. "You never opened this," Isaiah said. "I never received it." Isaiah placed the envelope between them. "No, you received it." Daniel looked at the unbroken seal. "Then why is it still closed?" Isaiah rested one hand on the grey folder. "Because someone decided you did not need a second look." Daniel did not touch the envelope. It lay between them beneath the fluorescent light, its paper softened by age, his name written across the front in a hand he did not recognize. Isaiah watched him. "You said, 'I received it.' You did. Then why is it here?" "Because receiving something and being allowed to see it are not always the same." Daniel looked at the seal again. It had never been broken. The maintenance room seemed smaller now. The heater had gone quiet. Somewhere beyond the door, water continued striking the loading dock roof. Daniel reached for the envelope. Isaiah did not stop him. Inside was a letter written on company paper. The date matched the week Hanbridge had closed the employee review office. The first paragraph thanked Daniel for reading. The second warned that complaints involving safety, payroll, and vendor coercion were being redirected before they reached senior leadership. The third paragraph named Julian Cross. Daniel stopped. He read the line again. The letter did not accuse Julian of theft. It described a pattern. Complaints connected to certain vendors vanished after passing through finance. Managers who questioned those vendors were transferred. Workers who continued asking questions were marked difficult, unreliable, or uncooperative. At the bottom was a signature, Isaiah Reed. Daniel looked across the table. "You wrote this." "I did. You worked for Hanbridge. For 16 years. The answer brought the memory back. A conference room on the 42nd floor. A labor review meeting during a winter expansion. A quiet man seated near the end of the table with a folder on his lap. Daniel had been late. Julian had summarized the issue before anyone else could speak. Operational noise. That was the phrase. Daniel remembered looking toward the man with the folder and saying there would be another opportunity to review the details. There had not been. "You were in that meeting," Daniel said. Isaiah nodded. "You tried to speak." "I did speak." Daniel could not remember the words. He remembered checking the time. The shame arrived without drama. It did not strike him. It settled. "What happened after you sent this?" "The letter entered executive review. It never reached me." "It reached your office. That is not the same thing." Isaiah's expression changed slightly. "No," he said. "It usually is not." Daniel lowered his eyes. Isaiah opened the grey folder and removed a personnel record. His own photograph appeared in the corner, younger but unmistakable. Beneath it were performance reviews, commendations, and a final disciplinary notice, failure to comply with document disposal protocol. "You refused to destroy the complaints," Daniel said. "I refused to destroy the only copies. They fired you. They offered retirement first. And you refused. I had a granddaughter living with me. Refusing was not noble. It was expensive." The door opened before Daniel could answer. A girl stepped inside, carrying a backpack with one broken zipper and a plastic grocery bag in one hand. She was slight, with dark braids tied behind her head and rain shining on the shoulders of her coat. She stopped when she saw Daniel. Her eyes moved from his face to the open folder. "You brought him here." "He followed the papers," Isaiah said. The girl placed the grocery bag on the table. "That does not answer me." "This is Nora." Daniel stood. Nora did not offer her hand. "I know who he is." Daniel waited. She pulled an old laptop from her backpack and connected it to a wall outlet. The casing was cracked near the hinge. A strip of tape held the charging cable in place. "You are scanning these?" Daniel asked. "I am saving them before somebody loses them again." Her tone was controlled, but the accusation remained clear. Isaiah handed her a small stack of pages. Nora opened a spreadsheet and entered dates, names, vendor codes, and approval stamps with practiced speed. Daniel watched the columns fill. How long have you been doing this? 3 months. You are in school. I can do both. Isaiah unpacked bread, eggs, and a carton of milk from the grocery bag. He placed the receipt beneath a magnet on the side of a metal cabinet. Daniel noticed 2 late notices already held there. Rent due, electric payment overdue. Isaiah saw him looking and turned the notices face down. You kept these files while working nights, Daniel said. I kept them while living. You could lose this job. Yes. You could lose your apartment. Yes. And you still refuse to give me the folder. Isaiah met his eyes. That is why the refusal matters. Nora stopped typing. She had placed 2 payment records side by side on the screen. Both carried Daniel's executive seal. One had been approved while he was attending a trade meeting in Seoul. The other had been approved less than an hour later from a terminal inside Hanbridge Tower. That cannot happen, Daniel said. It did, Nora replied. Not through the standard authorization path. She opened a 3rd record, then a 4th. The same seal appeared across different cities, sometimes minutes apart. Each payment went to a vendor created within the previous year. Each vendor had been introduced through the finance office. Daniel leaned closer. Show me the access history. There is none in these files. Then we need the server logs. Nora looked at Isaiah. Isaiah remained silent. Daniel understood the question behind the silence. Not whether he could read the system, whether he had earned the right to use what they knew. He stepped away from the laptop. My father lost his job when I was 13, he said. Neither of them moved. The factory closed without warning. He stood outside the gate for hours because he thought someone would come back and explain. No one did. Daniel looked at the folded rent notice on the cabinet. I promised myself I would never become a man who waited outside someone else's door. Isaiah listened without softening. So you built the door. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Yes. The word was difficult because it was true. Nora returned to the spreadsheet. After several seconds, she turned the screen toward them. These pages are not missing at random, she said. She highlighted a sequence of complaint numbers. Every gap appeared after a file had been routed through one specific finance office, Julian's office. Isaiah looked at Daniel. Daniel did not reach for the folder this time. What do you need from me? He asked. Isaiah gathered the scattered pages and placed them back beneath the red cord. Not your title. Daniel waited. Not your money. The rain weakened outside. Isaiah pushed the sealed letter toward him again, though it was no longer sealed. I need you to read what was sent to you. Daniel looked down at the page. And then? Isaiah tied the folder closed. Then you find the people you trained yourself not to see. Isaiah did not offer Daniel forgiveness. He offered him a folding cot in the back room of a neighborhood church. The room had once stored choir robes and folding chairs. Now it held 2 metal shelves, a small sink, a cracked mirror, and a window that faced a brick wall. The radiator knocked whenever the heat came on. You can stay 3 nights, Isaiah said. Daniel set his wet coat across the back of a chair. And after that, you decide whether you are looking for shelter or a way forward. Daniel looked at the narrow cot. What do you want in return? Nothing. No one wants nothing. Isaiah placed a spare blanket on the mattress. That belief may explain more than you think. He gave Daniel a clean shirt, a pair of work trousers, and a list of rules. No reporters, no phone calls from the church, no using Isaiah's name without permission, no touching the grey folder unless Isaiah or Nora was present. The final rule was written by hand. Do not promise what you cannot deliver. Daniel read it twice. The next morning, Isaiah woke him before sunrise. A small cleaning company needed help clearing an office after a pipe burst. One worker had called in sick. The pay was modest, in cash, and the shift would last until noon. Daniel had not cleaned an office since he was a child, helping his mother at a medical clinic. He carried buckets. He moved soaked carpet tiles. He wiped dirty water from the baseboards while employees stepped around him without looking down. At one point, a manager handed him an empty coffee cup and pointed toward a trash bag. Daniel took it. Isaiah saw. He did not smile. By noon, Daniel's shoulders ached. His hands smelled of bleach. The skin beneath his wedding ring, which he still wore though the marriage had ended years earlier, had turned pale from the water. The supervisor counted the money into his palm. Daniel looked at the bills. He had earned less in 6 hours than he once spent on lunch. Still, the money felt different. It had not arrived because of his name. That evening, Isaiah brought him to a small distribution warehouse near the edge of the city. The owner, Maria Velasquez, supplied food and medical goods to neighborhood stores. Her loading dock was crowded with delayed orders. A dispatcher stood beside a whiteboard covered with route numbers. Drivers argued near the door. 2 vans had been assigned to the same delivery zone, while another route had no vehicle at all. Maria looked at Isaiah. "I need hands, not advice." "He has hands," Isaiah said. Daniel began lifting boxes. For 20 minutes, he said nothing. He watched the drivers. He listened to the dispatcher repeat the same instructions. He noticed that the route board had been organized by delivery time rather than location. 3 vehicles were crossing the same bridge at different hours. A driver named Curtis threw his clipboard onto a table. "If I take the hospital route first, the pharmacy shipment will miss the receiving window." The dispatcher rubbed his forehead. "We do not have another van." Daniel looked at the board. "You do." The room quieted. Maria turned toward him. "I thought Isaiah brought you to carry boxes." "He did." Daniel pointed to a delivery listed as delayed. "That order has already been divided into 2 vehicles. Combine the northern stops, move the hospital shipment to the smaller van, and send Curtis through the service entrance before the morning restriction begins." The dispatcher frowned. "The small van cannot hold the full hospital order. It does not need to." Daniel lifted one invoice. "Half of this shipment is non-urgent storage stock. The receiving window only applies to the temperature-controlled cases." Curtis looked at the paper. "He is right." Maria studied Daniel for a moment. "How do you know the service entrance stays open?" "The hospital contract code ends in 7. That means independent delivery access." The dispatcher stared at him. "Who are you?" Daniel looked toward Isaiah. "A man carrying boxes." Maria let the silence remain for a few seconds. Then she handed Daniel a marker. "Show me." He reorganized the routes in less than 10 minutes. The hospital shipment arrived on time. The pharmacy received its order before closing. One driver finished early enough to help with the final neighborhood run. No one applauded. Maria gave Daniel another shift. 2 days later, Isaiah took him to meet Samuel Ortiz. Samuel lived above an auto repair shop with his wife and adult son. He walked with a brace on his left leg. The hydraulic accident had damaged his knee and lower back. Hanbridge had denied his final medical appeal before terminating him. Daniel stood in the narrow living room while Samuel read the old document. "You signed this," Samuel said. "My authorization is on it." "That is not what I said." Daniel looked at him. "Yes, I signed it." Samuel placed the paper on the table. "My wife worked 2 jobs after they let me go. My son dropped out of school for a year." Daniel did not defend the delegated system. He did not mention Julian. "I did not know what happened to you," he said. Samuel's expression hardened. "You keep saying that, like ignorance belongs to somebody else." Daniel lowered his eyes. "What should I understand?" Samuel looked surprised by the question. He leaned back carefully. "You should understand that the worst part was not losing the job. It was knowing there was no person left to speak to. Every number led to another number. Every letter came back with a code. Your company made me feel like I had disappeared before I was gone." Daniel listened. Samuel spoke for almost an hour. When they left, Isaiah did not ask what Daniel had learned. Nora did. She was waiting at the church with her laptop and a stack of scanned files. Daniel told her about Samuel. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I will make it right." Nora closed the laptop. "That is not an answer." Daniel paused. She pushed a sheet of paper toward him. "Write what you can do. Write what you cannot do. Put a date beside each promise." Daniel sat down. He could not restore Samuel's lost wages. He could not reopen the old medical claim without legal support. He could not guarantee that investigators would act. He could contact the insurance administrator. He could retrieve the contract records. He could help Samuel's son apply for a certification program through a former training partner. Daniel wrote each commitment down. Nora read the page. "You missed one." "What?" "Ask before deciding what he needs." Daniel added the line. The next morning, Maria called. A supplier had refused to release a shipment because Hanbridge still owed him money. Without the goods, 3 neighborhood stores would receive nothing. Daniel recognized the supplier's name, Thomas Bell, the husband of the woman who had written one of the thank you letters. Daniel called him from a public phone. Thomas refused to speak. Daniel did not mention the folder. He did not mention the investigation. He asked only whether the shipment could be divided so the smaller stores would receive enough to stay open. Thomas was silent. Then he asked, "Who told you to call me?" "No one." "That does not sound like the Daniel Han I knew." Daniel looked through the glass at Isaiah sweeping the church steps. "No," he said, "it does not." Daniel used his first 2 days of wages to cover part of the fuel cost. Maria covered the rest. The shipment moved. No reporter knew. No statement was released. That evening, Thomas arrived at the church, carrying an old payment ledger. He placed it on the table, but kept one hand over the cover. "These amounts were changed after I submitted them," he said. "The records made it look like I overcharged Hanbridge." Daniel leaned forward. "Who changed them?" Thomas looked at Isaiah. "Before I say anything else, I need to know he is standing with you." Daniel followed his gaze. Isaiah remained near the door. The ledger belonged to Thomas. The files belonged to the people whose names filled them. Even the truth no longer moved because Daniel asked it to. Isaiah studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped into the room. "He is not standing with me," Isaiah said. Daniel felt the words settle. Isaiah placed one hand on the back of the empty chair beside him. "Not yet." Thomas kept his hand on the ledger. Isaiah looked at Daniel. "But he has started learning how to stand where other people can see him." The first meeting took place in the back room of Maria Velasquez's warehouse after the final delivery van had left. There were 9 people around the folding table. 2 drivers, 1 mechanic, 3 small suppliers, Maria, Isaiah, Daniel. Nora sat near the wall with her old laptop open across her knees. She had taped a fresh piece of cardboard beneath the broken hinge so the screen would remain upright. No one had agreed to build a company. They had only agreed to listen. Maria placed a stack of unpaid invoices on the table. "These are not just from Hanbridge," she said. "The larger carriers all work the same way. They demand 90 days to pay, then charge us when they make a mistake." Curtis, the driver from the hospital route, leaned back in his chair. "They treat small vendors like free banks." Thomas Bell opened his old payment ledger. "They can delay us because they know we cannot afford to sue." Samuel Ortiz sat beside him with his injured leg extended beneath the table. He had brought no papers. He had brought names. Mechanics who had been dismissed after reporting safety problems. Drivers who had lost routes when they refused to falsify delivery logs. Dispatchers who had been blamed for schedules they had not created. Daniel listened and wrote each name down. No one asked him to speak. That was new. At Hanbridge, meetings had waited for his opinion. Here, every person at the table had already lived with the consequences of opinions made in rooms like his. Isaiah stood near the door, holding a paper cup of coffee. "What do the stores need?" he asked. Maria pointed toward a map pinned to the wall. "Reliable deliveries in the city, small loads, short notice. The major companies do not want them unless the fees are high. What do the drivers need? Routes that do not change after they leave the yard," Curtis said. "What do the suppliers need?" "Payment before our lights get shut off," Thomas replied. Isaiah looked toward Samuel. "What do the workers need?" Samuel rested both hands on the handle of his cane. "A place where reporting a broken machine does not make you the problem." Only then did Isaiah look at Daniel. "What does the company need?" Daniel studied the map. The answer came easily. "Volume." Isaiah waited. Daniel heard himself. That was the old answer. More routes, more vehicles, more contracts. Growth first, then stability later. He set down his pen. "No," he said. "It needs trust before volume." No one praised him for correcting himself. Maria moved the invoices aside. "We can start with 3 stores and the neighborhood clinic. That is all." "We could handle 12, Daniel said. Isaiah looked at him. Daniel glanced at the people around the table. Thomas was already calculating fuel costs. Curtis had only one working van. Maria's warehouse had no backup generator. Samuel could advise on maintenance, but he could not lift freight for long. 3 stores and the clinic, Daniel said. Nora typed the decision into a document. "We need rules," she said. Curtis laughed once. "We do not even have a company." "That is when rules matter most," she replied. The room went quiet. They spent the next hour deciding what could not be left to goodwill. Drivers would be paid weekly. Suppliers would receive partial payment when goods entered the warehouse, not months after delivery. Safety complaints would go to someone outside the daily management team. No single executive could approve a related vendor. Any worker could request a second review without risking dismissal. Daniel wrote the phrase on the whiteboard. Second look. He did not turn it into a slogan. He wrote it as a process. Maria circled the words. If a complaint involves the person who receives it, where does it go? To the review group, Nora said. Who chooses the group? Not Daniel, Isaiah answered. Daniel looked at him. Isaiah held his gaze. That is not punishment. It is design. Daniel nodded. The group agreed that workers, suppliers, and community clients would each hold a seat. Daniel could manage operations, but he would not have final authority over complaints or financial reviews. It was the first organization he had helped create, where his power had a boundary before his title existed. Near midnight, Naomi Park entered through the side door. She wore a dark coat and carried a canvas bag filled with files. Every conversation stopped. Naomi looked around the room, then at Daniel. You were told not to contact former Hanbridge employees. I did not contact you. Isaiah did. Isaiah lifted his coffee. Naomi placed the canvas bag on the table. I am not joining a rescue project for Daniel Han. No one asked you to, Maria said. Naomi looked at the whiteboard, the payment rules, and the list of review procedures. What is this? A company that has not earned the right to call itself one, Isaiah said. Naomi read the rules carefully. Daniel waited for her criticism. She pointed to the payment policy. This will create a cash shortage. We know, Maria said. To pay suppliers early, you need deposits from clients. Daniel nodded. And clients will not give deposits to a company with no history. Then we begin with clients who know the people doing the work, Isaiah said. Naomi turned to Daniel. And your role? Operations. Control? No. Ownership? Shared. Public credit? Daniel paused. No. Naomi watched him long enough to make the answer uncomfortable. Then she opened her bag. I kept copies of compliance memos before I resigned. They cannot be used publicly yet, but they can help you avoid rebuilding the same weaknesses. She placed the files beside Nora. I have conditions. Daniel expected legal protection, money, or authority. Naomi raised one finger. Every promise to a worker goes in writing. A second, no growth target can override payroll or safety. A third, if evidence clears Daniel of fraud, it does not clear him of responsibility. Daniel looked at the table. I agree. Naomi did not sit. I was not asking only you. One by one, the others agreed. The new operation began 3 days later, with one borrowed van, one rented refrigerated trailer, and a warehouse section Maria cleared near the rear door. They called it Second Look Cooperative Logistics because Nora refused every name that sounded as if Daniel were returning to power. Their first contracts were small. A grocery store needed produce delivered before dawn. A community pharmacy needed temperature-controlled medicine. A senior center needed weekly food shipments. The clinic needed medical supplies moved from a regional depot. Daniel built the schedules by hand. Curtis checked every route. Samuel inspected the van and found a cracked belt that would have failed within a week. Thomas negotiated fuel on credit. Maria handled the warehouse. Naomi reviewed every contract. Isaiah spoke with the clients. They trusted him. That mattered more than Daniel's experience. The first grocery delivery arrived early. The pharmacy shipment held its required temperature. The senior center manager signed the receipt and gave Curtis 2 cups of coffee for the road. The clinic contract was larger. It could cover payroll for 2 weeks. Daniel planned it carefully. The refrigerated trailer would collect the shipment before sunrise, transfer part of the load at Maria's warehouse, then continue to the clinic before the receiving window closed. At 4 a.m, the trailer failed to start. Samuel opened the engine panel while rain gathered on the shoulders of his coat. The battery is fine, he said. The control unit is not reading the cooling system. Daniel checked the time. They had less than an hour before the depot released the shipment to another carrier. We can rent another trailer, he said. With what money? Maria asked. Daniel reached for his phone, already thinking of former contacts. Isaiah saw the movement, no favors that become ownership later. Daniel lowered the phone. Curtis looked toward the warehouse. We could split the load between insulated vans. The medicine will not hold temperature for the full route, Naomi said. Nora stood beside the office door, watching the argument. What happens if we tell the clinic? She asked. Maria looked at her. We may lose the contract. What happens if we do not tell them? No one answered. Daniel looked at the silent trailer, the new company name painted unevenly across its side, and the people waiting for him to decide what kind of organization they had built. The old Daniel would have hidden the failure until he found a solution. He would have protected the contract first. He took the clinic manager's number from the schedule. Then he made the call. The clinic manager answered on the 4th ring. Daniel heard the fatigue in her voice before she spoke his name. Dr. Evelyn Shaw had spent the night preparing for a shipment that was now sitting at a regional depot with less than an hour remaining in its release window. What happened? She asked. Daniel looked at the silent trailer. The cooling control unit failed before departure. There was a pause. Can you still make the delivery? Not within the agreed window. Behind him, Maria lowered her eyes. Curtis stood with both hands on his hips. Samuel remained beside the open engine panel, rain collecting along the edge of his cane. Daniel continued. We can move the most urgent medicine in insulated containers and hold it within range for a shorter route. The remaining stock will need another refrigerated carrier. And you have one? Not yet. Another pause followed. The old instinct pressed against him. Soften the language. Promise a solution. Protect confidence until the problem was under control. Daniel did not do it. If you release the full shipment to another company, I understand, he said. We will cover any additional handling cost caused by our failure. Maria looked at him sharply. They did not have enough money to cover a large penalty. Dr. Shaw exhaled. Which medicine is urgent? Daniel turned toward Naomi. who had the shipment list open. Insulin, 2 cardiac medications, and temperature-sensitive antibiotics. The clinic can operate until noon without the storage stock, Dr. Shaw said. Bring the urgent cases first. I will call the depot and ask them to hold the rest. Daniel glanced at the clock. We can have the first load there in 40 minutes. Do not make me a promise because you are afraid to lose the contract. Daniel looked at the people waiting beside him. We will call again in 10 minutes with a confirmed route. That is better. The line ended. No one spoke at first. Then Samuel closed the engine panel. We can use both vans, he said. Keep the cases separated and run them directly. No warehouse transfer. Curtis nodded. I will take the hospital road. It is empty this early. Maria began removing insulated containers from storage. Naomi checked the temperature requirements. Isaiah lifted boxes without being asked. Daniel did not stand at the center and give orders. He asked what each person needed. Within 8 minutes, the urgent medicine was secured. Nora wrote the departure times on the whiteboard. Daniel called the clinic again and gave Dr. Shaw the confirmed route. Both vans arrived before the temporary containers lost range. The clinic kept the contract. The profit disappeared. Second Look paid the depot fee, the emergency packing cost, and the second driver. Daniel suggested delaying part of his own payment. Maria looked at him across the office desk. You are not receiving payment. Daniel had forgotten. Maria almost smiled. They spent the afternoon reviewing the failure. No one blamed Samuel for missing the control unit. He had inspected the mechanical system, but the electronic fault had not appeared during the test. No one blamed Curtis for the schedule. No one blamed Maria for renting old equipment. They wrote down what had happened. Then they wrote down what they had assumed. The trailer started during inspection. The cooling system had responded once. The rental company had promised recent maintenance. Every assumption had seemed reasonable until it failed at the same time. Nora placed a second sheet beside the first. What did we still have? She asked. Curtis looked at her. 2 vans, insulated cases, Maria added. A client willing to hear the truth, Naomi said. Samuel tapped the maintenance report. And enough time to stop lying to ourselves. Daniel wrote the answers on the board. He understood what Isaiah had been trying to teach him in the maintenance room. Failure became dangerous when people turned it into identity. Once they decided they were incompetent, ruined, or beyond repair, they stopped examining what had actually happened. The trailer had failed. The company had not become a failure. They moved to the next question. Who had seen something they had missed? The rental mechanic had noticed a brief warning light, but had not recorded it because the signal disappeared. Curtis had heard the cooling fan change pitch during the previous delivery. Maria had assumed both details were too small to matter. Daniel added a new rule. Any worker could request a second review based on a detail that seemed minor, even if the equipment passed inspection. No penalty, no ridicule, no need to prove danger before asking someone to look again. Nora read the rule from the board. That should apply to people too. The room became quiet. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? Samuel asked for a second review of his medical claim. Lena Brooks asked for a second review of the overtime records. Isaiah asked someone to look again at the complaints. She glanced toward the grey folder resting on the desk. Everyone kept telling them the first decision was enough. Isaiah did not respond, but his hand settled against the back of a chair. Daniel wrote another sentence beneath the rule. No decision affecting employment, safety, or medical support would become final until someone outside the original chain reviewed it. That evening, they turned the process into 5 questions. What happened? What remained? Who saw what we missed? What small action could create new evidence? What part of the system allowed the failure to continue? They did not call it a philosophy. They used it on the next delivery, then on a damaged invoice, then on a disagreement between a driver and a store manager. The questions slowed decisions down. They also made them harder to hide. During the following week, Second Look completed every route without another missed delivery. 3 more neighborhood businesses signed short contracts. The company still had almost no cash reserve, but payroll went out on time. Daniel watched Curtis hand Maria the signed delivery sheets at the end of Friday's shift. No one waited for Daniel's approval before closing the books. He felt the old discomfort. Then he let it pass. Across the room, Nora continued scanning the grey folder. She had built a timeline of vendor approvals, complaint numbers, and executive seals. Each missing complaint appeared near a payment to one of 6 companies. Those companies used different names and addresses, but their registration documents shared the same legal contact. A firm controlled by Julian's brother-in-law. Naomi leaned over the laptop. That connection was never disclosed to the board. Daniel studied the dates. Julian approved the vendors through separate committees. Nora opened another file. He also used your seal. Daniel pointed to 2 approvals. These were issued on the same day. One in Seoul, Nora said. One in Chicago. I was in Seoul. You spoke at a conference that morning. There is public video. Naomi examined the second record. This approval came from a terminal inside the executive finance office. Daniel looked at the timestamp. The seal had been used 19 minutes after he appeared live on stage thousands of miles away. Nora opened more records. The same conflict appeared again and again. Daniel's authorization moved between cities faster than any person could travel. The system had treated the seal as proof, even when the dates made that proof impossible. Daniel felt no relief. The records might clear him of direct fraud, but they also revealed how little protection existed beneath his name. He had built a company where one symbol could replace judgment, responsibility, and human review. Naomi closed the laptop. We need the server logs before they are erased. We cannot enter Hanbridge, Daniel said. Someone inside may still have access. Isaiah looked toward Thomas Bell's ledger. People talk when they believe the truth will protect someone other than the man at the top. Daniel understood. He began listing the employees who had managed executive permissions, not directors, not vice presidents, system administrators, audit clerks, the people whose names rarely appeared in meetings. Nora's phone vibrated on the table. She read the message and looked at Daniel. "What is it?" he asked. She turned the screen toward him. The message contained no greeting. Julian Cross knows about the files. A second message arrived before anyone spoke. He wants to meet Daniel alone. Julian chose the private dining room on the top floor of the Mercer Hotel. Daniel had signed contracts there, dismissed executives there, and once celebrated the opening of Hanbridge's 6th regional hub. The room had no windows. It did not need them. Power had always been the view. A hostess led Daniel through the empty restaurant without asking his name. The private room was unchanged. Dark wood, white linen, a silver water pitcher placed exactly between 2 chairs. Julian sat with his jacket unbuttoned and one hand resting beside a sealed envelope. Daniel took the chair across from him. "You asked to meet." Julian studied the work coat Daniel wore over a borrowed shirt. "I heard you had become difficult to locate. You found me. I always know where problems are moving." Daniel glanced at the envelope. "What do you want?" Julian poured water into both glasses. "No greeting? You used my executive seal while I was overseas." Julian stopped pouring. Then he set the pitcher down. "You should be careful with accusations. I was speaking in Seoul when an approval was issued from your office. Then someone made an administrative error. 19 minutes later, the same seal approved a second vendor." Julian leaned back. "You have always admired certainty," Julian said, "even when the facts are incomplete." Daniel did not answer. Julian touched the envelope. "The board is prepared to revise its public position. The investigation has become disruptive. Investors are nervous. Lenders want continuity. If you cooperate, we can describe the authorization failures as a breakdown in internal controls rather than intentional executive misconduct. We, the board, council, the people still capable of containing this. Julian slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a draft statement. Daniel read the first page. Hanbridge acknowledged that Daniel had not personally directed the disputed vendor transfers. The company expressed regret for premature conclusions. An advisory role would be created after the investigation. A financial settlement would cover legal costs and restore access to selected personal assets. His apartment, a portion of his frozen accounts. His name returned to the company website. Daniel turned the page. The conditions appeared near the end. He would surrender all copied records related to employee complaints, vendor payments, and internal review. He would refrain from contacting former staff. He would publicly support Julian's restructuring plan. He would describe the grey folder as an unverified collection of discarded documents. Daniel placed the statement on the table. You want the folder. I want unreliable material kept out of a legal process. You had the originals destroyed. I ordered routine disposal during a corporate emergency. Before the emergency was public, Julian's jaw shifted. Daniel noticed it. The kind of movement Julian made when a question reached somewhere he had not prepared. You have no idea what Isaiah Reed kept, Daniel said. Julian looked toward the closed door. There it was. Not confusion. Recognition. Daniel lowered his voice. You remember him, an unhappy former employee. He warned us. He complained, constantly. He named the vendor pattern. He saw conspiracies in ordinary decisions. Daniel watched Julian's fingers press against the tablecloth. You fired him because he would not destroy the complaints. I removed a man who refused procedure. The procedure protected you. Julian's hand went still. Then he smiled. It was not warmth. It was recovery. You are sleeping in a church, Daniel. You carry boxes for a warehouse that cannot cover a single insurance claim. The people around you may admire your humility, but admiration does not pay creditors. He pushed the statement closer. This does. Daniel looked down at the signature line. For one moment, the offer became physical. A dry room. A clean shirt. A key that opened his own front door. Lawyers who returned his calls. His name separated from the word thief. He thought of the hotel receptionist lowering her voice. The young man recording him in the rain. Melissa in the lobby, with her hands over her mouth. His father standing outside the factory gate. He also thought of Samuel Ortiz, saying the worst part was finding no person left to speak to. Daniel folded the statement once. Julian relaxed. Then Daniel tore it through the signature line. The sound was quiet. Julian watched the two halves settle on the table. You are choosing strangers over your own company. No. Daniel placed both pieces beside the untouched glass. I am choosing the part of the company you taught me not to see. Julian's face lost color, though his voice remained controlled. You think these people will protect you. They should not have to. You think admitting mistakes will make you noble. I am not asking to be noble. Then what are you asking for? Daniel stood. A record no one can edit after the fact. Julian remained seated. You will lose everything. Daniel looked around the room where he had once believed every important decision belonged to men like them. I already did. He walked toward the door. Julian spoke before Daniel reached it. If that folder enters the investigation, Isaiah Reed will be exposed as possessing company property. The girl may be questioned. The warehouse may be searched. Every person helping you will be dragged into this. Daniel stopped. The threat had been delivered without heat. That made it precise. He turned. If you go near Nora, the meeting ends differently. Julian adjusted his cuff. There is the old Daniel. No, Daniel said. The old Daniel would have threatened you privately. He opened the door. The next conversation will be recorded. By morning, the first article appeared. Disgraced founder secretly organizing former workers while hiding stolen corporate files. A second report described Second Look Cooperative Logistics as an unauthorized operation built from Hanbridge contacts. Anonymous sources questioned whether Daniel was moving money through community vendors. Maria's largest client suspended its contract. The rental company demanded the trailer back. A city inspector arrived at the warehouse before noon. Nora found her photograph attached to a post calling her family extortionists. Isaiah turned the screen face down. Daniel stood in the warehouse office while the others waited. No one accused him. That was worse. "This is because of me," he said. Maria crossed her arms. "This is because someone is afraid." Naomi entered carrying a legal envelope. It is no longer only media pressure. She placed the papers on the desk. Daniel read the first page. A formal inquiry had been scheduled before the Independent Creditor Committee. Daniel, Isaiah, Nora, Naomi, and several former vendors were ordered to appear. The request demanded all surviving employee review records. Isaiah looked toward the grey folder. "They want it on the table," he said. Daniel turned to him. "Will you bring it?" Isaiah lifted the folder and tested the faded red cord with his thumb. "I will bring it." "To the investigators." Isaiah looked at Daniel. "To the room." He tied the cord tighter. "Who receives it will depend on what you say when everyone is listening." The hearing room had been designed to make emotion look inappropriate. The walls were pale stone. A long table divided the witnesses from the creditor committee, and every seat faced the same digital clock above the door. Daniel entered last. He wore the same dark coat he had used at the warehouse. Reporters turned toward him. Camera shutters began to click. He did not look at them. Isaiah sat beside Nora with the grey folder across his knees. Naomi arranged her documents in careful stacks. Maria, Thomas, Samuel and Curtis filled the row behind them. Across the room, Julian sat with company counsel. His suit was perfect. His hands were not. Daniel noticed the right one tightening around a pen whenever Isaiah touched the folder. The committee chair, Helen Ward, called the hearing to order. Hanbridge counsel spoke first. He described the collapse as a failure of internal controls. He called the disputed payments complicated. He referred to the missing complaints as unofficial records with uncertain custody. A young clerk stopped typing. One committee member looked toward Isaiah. Julian lowered his eyes to a page he had already read. Naomi was called forward. She explained that Hanbridge had once maintained an independent employee review office. Complaints involving safety, payroll, vendor pressure, and retaliation were supposed to bypass ordinary management. "What happened to that office?" Helen asked. "It was closed." "By whom?" Naomi looked at Daniel. "By executive authorization, bearing Mr. Hahn's seal." The room shifted. Daniel gave no denial. Naomi continued. "After the closure, complaints were routed through finance and operations. Many disappeared before reaching compliance. She presented warnings she had sent before resigning. Each had been forwarded away from Daniel's direct review. "Can you prove Mr. Hahn never saw them?" Julian's attorney asked. "No," Naomi said. "I can prove the system allowed others to decide what he saw." The answer helped Daniel. It also condemned him. Nora was called next. Her feet did not reach the floor. She placed the old laptop on the table and adjusted the taped hinge. Julian's attorney objected to her age. Helen looked at Nora. "Do you understand that you must tell the truth?" "Yes." "Then continue." Nora opened the timeline. She showed payment approvals issued under Daniel's executive seal. Some had been created in Chicago, while public video placed Daniel in Seoul. Others appeared within minutes from separate locations. "The seal moved faster than a person could," she said. She displayed the vendor records. Different companies shared the same legal contact and registration agent. That agent worked for a firm connected to Julian's brother-in-law. Nora opened the complaint sequence. Every missing file had passed through one finance office before disappearing. Helen turned to Julian. "Was that your office?" Julian adjusted his cuff. "It was part of my division." The certainty in his voice did not survive the sentence. Thomas presented his payment ledger. Curtis submitted route logs for deliveries that never happened. Maria described the pressure on small suppliers. Samuel placed his termination appeal on the table. He rested one hand on the brace around his knee. "My medical review was denied before anyone interviewed me," he said. The company said the decision was final. Helen examined the document. Daniel's seal appeared at the bottom. The reporters turned toward him. Isaiah stood. The room grew quieter before he reached the witness chair. He placed the grey folder on the table, but kept one hand over it. "My name is Isaiah Reed. I worked for Hanbridge for 16 years. I managed records for the Employee Review Office until the company closed it." "Why did you keep these documents?" Helen asked. "Because I was ordered to destroy complaints that had never been heard. You understood they belonged to the company. I understood they belonged to the people whose lives were inside them." Julian's attorney stood. "That is not a legal answer." Isaiah looked at him. "It is the answer." Isaiah described the letters, safety reports, and appeals. Employees had trusted the review office because it stood outside the departments they accused. Then he untied the red cord. The sound was small. Still, the room seemed to hear it. He opened the folder and removed Daniel's old authorization, closing the office. Helen read the page. "Mr. Hahn, do you dispute this?" Daniel stood. "No." His attorney touched his sleeve. Daniel stepped away. "I approved the closure." Daniel faced the committee. "I did not create the false vendors. I did not approve those payments knowingly, but I built a company where my seal mattered more than the people using it. I removed the office that could have challenged the decisions beneath my name. No one moved. I told myself I was delegating. The people harmed by those decisions experienced abandonment." Julian's attorney rose again. "This statement goes beyond the question." Daniel looked at Helen. "It is the question. I was not informed because I built a system that rewarded people for keeping difficult truths away from me. That does not make me innocent. It makes my responsibility different." Across the room, Julian's pen slipped from his hand. It struck the table once. Helen turned toward him. "Mr. Cross, did your office control access to executive authorization credentials? We managed administrative permissions. Did your office route complaints away from compliance? We followed efficiency protocols. Did you disclose your family connection to the vendor agent?" Julian looked toward counsel. "We had no way of knowing every indirect relationship." The sentence entered the room and died there. Isaiah removed his hand from the folder. He pushed it across the table, not toward Daniel, but toward Helen. "This does not belong to him," Isaiah said. "It does not belong to me either." Helen placed both hands on the cover. "Who does it belong to?" "To the record." The committee secured the documents, froze payments to connected vendors, and gave priority to employee wages and verified supplier claims. Julian was suspended from executive authority pending investigation. No one clapped. He remained seated while people gathered their papers. His face had gone pale. He adjusted his jacket as though the right line of fabric might restore the shape of the room. Before closing the hearing, Helen looked at Daniel. "If the allegations against Mr. Cross are confirmed, the board may consider restoring you to an executive position. Would you accept?" Daniel looked at the grey folder beneath the investigator's hands. Then he looked at Isaiah, Samuel, Naomi, and Nora. "I would accept responsibility," he said. "That was not my question." "No," Daniel replied. "It was mine." 3 months passed before anyone removed Daniel Hand's name from the investigation list. By then, the city had moved on. Julian Cross had been charged with fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy. Several shell companies were dissolved. Accounts tied to his relatives were frozen. None of it restored what had been lost. Hanbridge entered court, supervised restructuring. Employee wages were paid before executive bonuses and lender claims. Small suppliers received partial settlements. Safety complaints once marked resolved were reopened. Some workers returned, others did not. Samuel Ortiz never asked for his old job back. The company funded his medical care and compensated his family for lost income, but he accepted neither a ceremony nor a staged apology. He wanted the record corrected. This time it was. Naomi Park joined the oversight board. Her first proposal required every complaint involving safety, medical support, termination, or vendor pressure to receive review from someone outside the original chain. The proposal passed. She watched what people did after the cameras left. Maria's warehouse became the first permanent home of Second Look Cooperative Logistics. The company still had one borrowed loading bay, 2 aging vans, and a refrigerated trailer that started only after Samuel replaced the control unit. Nora chose the new lettering. No founder's name appeared beneath it. The cooperative agreement gave workers, suppliers, and community clients equal voting seats. Managers could recommend growth, but they could not delay payroll to fund expansion. Safety reports went directly to the review council. No person could approve a vendor connected to family or private business. Daniel signed the agreement last. The pen paused above the line where his title should have appeared. Operations Coordinator. For once, the title described the work instead of hiding the person who performed it. He read it once. Then he signed. Isaiah stood beside the loading door with a broom in one hand. "You expected something larger," he said. Daniel looked at the title. "I used to." The cooperative grew slowly. A pharmacy joined first, then a food bank, then 2 neighborhood clinics. The senior center renewed its contract and paid a deposit that allowed Maria to repair the generator. There were no launch parties, no magazine covers. When a driver reported that a route schedule was unsafe, the delivery was delayed. The client complained. Daniel reviewed the timing and discovered the driver was right. The old Daniel would have called the delay unacceptable. The new procedure called it evidence. The schedule changed. Several months later, the creditor committee offered Daniel a path back to Hanbridge. The board wanted stability. Investors wanted a familiar face. Newspapers called him the founder, who helped expose his own company. Daniel read the offer in the church room, where he had slept during his first 3 nights without a home. The cot had been folded against the wall. The cracked mirror remained above the sink. He declined. He agreed to testify, advise the independent board, and help recover missing records. He would not return as chairman. Some called the decision courageous. Others called it foolish. Daniel answered neither group. Isaiah refused a position on the Hanbridge board as well. He accepted a smaller role, archivist. The title gave him control over a public record center built inside an abandoned library. Workers could submit complaints there without routing them through management. Old cases were stored beside new ones. Every closed file required a written explanation and the name of the reviewer. Nora designed the digital index. On the first day the center opened, she carried the gray folder through the front doors. The red cord had been replaced, but the original remained inside a clear sleeve. The water stains were still visible, so were the bent corners and faded handwriting. Second look, do not discard. The folder was placed in a glass case near the entrance. Daniel objected. "It should be used," he said, "not displayed." "It is being used," Nora replied. She pointed toward a desk across the room. A young warehouse worker sat there with a damaged lunch container beside his chair. He was filling out a safety complaint while an independent reviewer waited without rushing him. No manager stood behind him. No one told him the first decision was final. Daniel watched the worker turn the page and continue writing. The folder no longer belonged to a scandal. It belonged to the moment before a person disappeared from the record. That evening, after the visitors left, Isaiah swept dust from the library floor. Daniel helped him move the chairs back into place. They worked without speaking. Outside, rain touched the windows in soft lines. The city towers rose beyond the neighborhood, bright against the dark. Daniel could see the Hanbridge building from there. For most of his life, he had measured success by how high above the street he could stand. Now, he was carrying folding chairs across a public room, while an old man swept beside him. The work felt small. It was not. Before locking the doors, Nora returned to the glass case and adjusted the folder. Daniel watched her straighten it. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "What?" "Being the person everyone listened to." Daniel looked through the glass at the faded cover. "Sometimes." Nora waited. He turned toward the desks where people would return with complaints and stories once treated as waste. "Now I am learning to listen before they have to." Nora switched off the display light. The room became quiet. Isaiah placed the broom against the wall. Daniel picked up the final chair. Together, they walked toward the door. Behind them, the grey folder remained in the dark, not hidden, not owned, and no longer waiting for permission to matter.